My fellow prophecy student, greetings. The popular teaching of a 7-year Antichrist rule in the end times seems to be a major component to the rapture theory that is so zealously propagated by mainstream evangelicals. Ever since the 7-year view came to my attention, I have always wondered about the basis on which they build their arguments in its support. Certainly, this teaching must have a strong biblical foundation why it is so popular and why its advocates can teach it with such confidence. It was when I had a rather lively debate on the subject of the Antichrist with a Pentecostal lady that I realized that many are accepting this 7-year theory without knowing where it is coming from or how to defend it. In the discussion, I made a probe into her Antichrist 7-year argument, and she doesn't seem to know how to even explain it. I was hoping to get some details as to the basis for this belief, but she was unable to provide any help. In fact, when I brought to her attention the 7 references to the 1260 days or the 3.5 years from different passages of scriptures, she was left with no choice but to admit that her position was clearly a mistake. It was then that I started to wonder if the doctrine of a 7-year Antichrist reign is really an official theological position after all. It was not until I read one of those books written by one of the major proponents of the secret rapture that I got a full exposition purporting to give a biblical basis for this teaching. However, after I read the book, I was left with more questions than answers. First, to begin with, I can see a clear disagreement between the arguments of the author with the parallel prophecies in the book of Daniel. It seems as if there is an attempt to ignore the clear text from the parallel prophecies which speaks consistently of a 3.5-year Antichrist reign, while they endeavor to explain their theory from obscure texts. As a prophecy student who was studying Bible prophecy long before I got baptized, when I see the theological pitfalls into which even the most prominent Bible commentators have fallen, it helps me to better appreciate the foundation that was laid for me in the study of the prophetic word. One of the fundamental principles that contribute tremendously to my understanding of Bible prophecy is the coordination of parallel prophecies. Parallel prophecies are prophecies that give the same prediction using similar and complementary details, and this is the place where I believe the 7-year theory fell down. According to the proponents of this teaching, the Antichrist will reign for 7 years based on the 70th-week prophecy of Daniel 9. When I realized that this is what was offered as the basis for this doctrinal position, I immediately recognized it as a clear misfit in light of the historical chronology that the 70th-week prophecy represents. Here is the gist of how the 7-year theory is explained. The 70 weeks in question are not literal weeks. It is suggested that each day should be equivalent to a year, which I believe is quite correct. And while the advocates of the 7-year theory seem to agree that the 70 weeks chronology began with the command to rebuild Jerusalem, leading up to the coming of the Messiah at the end of the 69th week, for some mysterious reason, they separate the final week and reserve it for the end-time reign of the Antichrist. Not only do I find it mysterious, but suspicious, because when you make a separation like that, you are left with no other choice but to apply all the characteristics of the Messiah in that prophecy to the king of fierce countenance, the Antichrist. For example, when the Bible says, "And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week," the evangelical prophecy experts would interpret that to mean Antichrist will sign a 7-year peace deal with Israel. And they would further tell you that the verse that says, "And he shall cause all sacrifice and oblation to cease," is really pointing us to the banning of sacrificial offering and temple worship by the Antichrist. Thus, the work of Christ, spoken of in Daniel 9, is categorized as the work of Antichrist. There is no apparent reason or biblical explanation instructing that this should be done. The fact is, when you match up this prophecy with history, you will not only see a straight, unbroken timeline which terminated at the end of the 70th week, but also a clear, unmistakable fulfillment in the life and death of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. In the statement that says, "He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week," it is actually referring to the confirmation of the new covenant. The new covenant was confirmed by the blood of Christ. You will notice that this statement was made in conjunction with the previous verse, which says, "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself." Isn't that clear enough? Furthermore, when the angel told Daniel that the Messiah shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, it is actually another reference to the death of Christ. It was at the point of Jesus' demise, when he made the solemn cry, "It is finished," that the veil of the temple was rented in twain from top to bottom. This was clearly signaling the end of the old covenant sacrificial system in light of the reality that the true sacrifice is now slain. We need to understand that Daniel chapter 9 is not to be isolated from Daniel chapter 8. It was due to Daniel's lack of understanding of the 2300 days referred to in chapter 8 why the explanation in chapter 9 was necessary. In fact, when you read chapter 9, you will recognize that more verses were devoted to Daniel's prayer for Israel and less about the 70-week prophecy. The prophet went into sackcloth and ashes as a result of the preliminary explanation of the vision he received in chapter 8. It appears Daniel was troubled at the thought that his people may have to spend an inordinately long time under oppression, why he felt it necessary to seek the Lord with such great earnestness. The explanation we see in the last 4 verses in chapter 9 came as a direct result of Daniel's expressed need for further clarification of that particular aspect of the vision in chapter 8. Because Daniel 8 is parallel to chapters 2, 7, and 11, we cannot expect an explanation that deviates from the common theme, the succession of world kingdoms leading up to the second coming of Christ. When we examine Daniel 7 and verse 25, we see a reference to time, times, and dividing of time in relation to the duration of the little horn's oppression of the saints. This is clearly a reference to 3.5 years or 1260 days of Antichrist's reign, after which he will be slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Daniel 7 and verse 11. In chapter 11, we see a similar scenario in relation to the king of the north. This is a line of prophecy that continues into chapter 12. In verse 7, the Bible predicted that this king of the north will scatter the powers of the holy people for a time, times, and a half, again a period of 3.5 years. Certainly, it is difficult to reconcile the 7-year position within this consistent prophecy framework. On the other hand, we have the end-time prophecies of Revelation that deals with the same theme. We were never told about any other period other than 42 months or 1260 days. If we as diligent prophecy students pay enough attention to the need for consistency in the interpretation of difficult prophecies, we cannot go wrong if we apply this simple principle. Use those prophecies that are simple and straightforward to explain the parallel prophecies that are difficult to understand. Both the 70-week and the 1260-day prophecy are dealt with in details in the ebook entitled How to Crack the 70-Week Prophecy Code in Daniel 9. It comes as a part of the End Time Prophecy e-course package. Download the End Time Prophecy e-course package by clicking on the link in the video or the link below. It is www.prophecyecourse.com. Hope you are blessed by this video. Thanks for watching.